Hey guys, so recently I did a photo editing collab with one of the people that I went to Valley of the Gods with. His handle's Thralski, his name is Matt, really cool guy, great photographer. So what we ended up doing is we ended up shooting 3 photo projects, sent the raw data to each other to edit into whatever the respective style or vibe of the picture might be. We got together and sort of critiqued each other's work so we could kind of see what ideas sort of led to the culminating image. So let's get into this. So this is the first raw that I was given. To be honest, I wasn't totally sure what to do with this. This is definitely pretty far away from what I would normally shoot. And then we have 5 exposures of this glorious sunset. And then we have this huge folder full of tons and tons of raws of more or less the same monolith. This was affectionately known as Cock Rock. And I mean, there was actually a couple images in here that were like super cool for different reasons, like this one in particular, because you have like this long exposure going on down here and some light trails.
She had a flashlight on her hip, or I don't know if she had one on her hip and her headlamp, but she had something going on, and she was picking up rocks to weigh Cambry's tent down. I think she kind of just walked in the shot, and I thought it was kind of cool.
It is kind of cool.
I never did anything with it.
And if I remember correctly, we were out in the valley and you had the PhotoPills app open and we were looking for the galactic core.
Yeah, it was pretty accurate actually. I was pretty surprised.
So these are my edits.
That is very you, I will say.
Yeah, you know, I was a little bit, like I said, I was kind of struggling with this one because I wasn't totally sure what to do with it since it's so far out of what I would shoot.
Yeah, the crop is interesting, I will say. It's definitely not something that I would normally go for, but I like how it's zoomed in a little bit.
Yeah, so I actually crop all my stuff to 5x4 if I intend to put it on Instagram. That way it takes up the most screen real estate and I can put as much detail in there as I can.
Yeah, fair enough. That photo's, it was framed in the 3x2, so that makes a lot of sense.
And then my second glorious sunset again.
I like the colors a lot in that one. That's oddly saturated for you, I will say.
Well, I mean, the sky was so vibrant in the moment that it only made sense to lean into that rather than try and pull away from it.
Yeah, that's fair.
I kind of like this juxtaposition where, you know, the foreground, or where you would normally assume the focus of it is negative space, it's dark, and then you have what I would consider the real main focus of this image, the background, kind of obscured by that foreground darkness.
Yeah, the silhouette makes it, you know, the sky is the main focus, of course, and not the foreground. In my image, it's completely the opposite, so I'm glad you did something different than I did.
And, you know, that definitely comes down to well, I guess the photographer or the editor's personal preference as far as, you know, what they think that image needs. But I think in this image in particular, like you said, I leaned really hard into the saturation because in the moment it was so vibrant.
Yeah, and it kind of lends itself to more of what it felt like to be there, because it was a little darker, you know, being there. It was right at the tail end of the sunset, so yeah, that makes sense.
Great images on your part. Definitely technically competent as far as framing and, you know, exposure time and all the other little ancillary settings. Very good on you.
Thanks.
All right, and then our final image.
All about the sky, baby.
All about the sky.
That silhouette is still very striking to me.
So as far as this image went, I really leaned into bringing that sky out. I didn't really want detail in the foreground because it detracts from the sky.
Yeah, that's fair. The Milky Way is pretty apparent in this image. Messed around with Milky Way shots too much. I've done like maybe 5 or 6, and this one isn't as apparent as a couple of my other shots. But for being in the area that we were with a whole bunch of light pollution, you can see the light pollution on the bottom right part of the screen from like hundreds of miles away. So I think for as much light pollution as was in the scene, the Milky Way being as apparent as it is kind of a little surprising to me, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I mean, I've shot the galactic core quite a few times while I've been down in the valley, and it's actually interesting because every time we go, it always looks a little bit different. I mean, obviously the stars aren't exactly in the same position relative to me as the photographer. I always get something different with the galactic core and the Milky Way.
Yeah, that's nice.
Alrighty, so that's what you gave me, and that's how I edited it.
All right, so I obviously went a little bit different in the way that I processed these. I will say I went back and changed a few things after initially editing them, and I tried to do a little bit more of a, I would say, challenge in editing most of these in a way that I wouldn't edit another one of my images. And you've seen some of my stuff, the ones that I printed out and whatnot. This one of Hovenweep is basically what I would consider to be the standard of how I edit. These two are a little bit different from the way that I would edit. They're a little bit more cinematic, a little bit more of a blue cast. I tend to stick with a lot of warm images, but I intentionally chose to kind of get away from that a little bit. This image, I definitely wanted to keep the same aspect ratio as it was shot in, because just the way that I framed it when I shot it, I knew that there'd be no way that I could really crop in, and this was at 24, so either I backed up and potentially missed the shot, or snapped this and then maybe could have, went into 4x5 crop, but I just like the way that it looks. I have trouble cropping for Instagram. Like, I like to frame things in camera quite a bit, and that's a problem when you are going to end up putting stuff on Instagram, because you want that 4x5 crop, and I cannot shoot that way. I don't know why. It's just ingrained into my brain that, frame in camera.
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. If you can frame in camera, do it, because it ultimately makes your image better.
For sure. The color grading in this one isn't heavy, but I think it kind of brings out the tones in the foreground. I put a little bit of a cinematic color grade on it, where there's blue in the shadows and like an orange yellow in the highlights. And it's pretty subtle, but it actually makes quite a bit of difference, especially in the bushes in the foreground. Back to this one, I think this is probably one of my best images that I've ever shot, just in terms of composition, luck of being there at the right time.
Yeah, it was a good one. Heck of a capture. So these are the images that I sent Matt to work on. So go ahead and walk me through the images. Tell me what you did.
We'll start with the black and white. I think this is probably my favorite image of the 6, just because of the opportunity, the God rays, the crazy clouds that we had. This being right in the center and having it framed really well. And so in color, I didn't really feel like it did the photo justice, and I wanted to bring out the light rays coming down. This turned out incredibly well, and I'm pleasantly surprised. I would say out of all of the photos that I edited, I'm the most proud of this edit.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Incredible. Good job. I'm very impressed. And then for these other two, I kind of tried to step outside my comfort zone a little bit and do more of a cinematic filmic vibe. And I understand that that's probably a little bit more toward your area of editing style. So these two might look pretty similar for both of us, but I decided I would just do it anyway. I really wanted to bring out all the spottiness, where the clouds were overhead and the light was just leaking through in a couple spots. This spot might be a little hot, but I think it kind of just highlights the craziness of that valley, and how, at any time of day, that place has the most insane lighting conditions.
It pushes you to know your hardware, and it pushes you to test your ability to frame.
For sure. And from the original, this is actually quite, way more edited, I would say, or altered from the original look than I would normally go for. But I'm digging the vibe. The only thing I'm not super happy with is the color of the blue.
So how would you change it if you had more time?
I don't know if it's a time issue. I think it's just a struggling with myself on a personal choice level.
Oh, I see.
I did think about crushing the blues entirely and just having a gray sky, but that gave it more of a vibe more of a spooky vibe, and I wasn't really going for that. So I'm not exactly sure how to fix that. If I were to complain about one thing, it's the only thing that I would complain about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really like this edit. I like you kind of crushed grays or crushed blacks, and then backfilling with a little bit of color. This definitely has sort of that lo-fi, maybe Polaroid-y sort of quality to it.
That's exactly what I was going for too.
And that area you were talking about, that hot spot in between those two monoliths on the wall.
Yeah.
So that area, I actually have film of this, but that area, the soil on top is actually a lighter color than all the surroundings. So not only is the sun illuminating it, but the actual soil color is brighter than the surrounding stuff.
Interesting to consider for sure. And then this one here is really, really contrasty. Definitely not something that I would typically do. I kind of try to stay a little bit on the low contrast, maybe like medium contrast side, but this is like crazy amount of contrast from what I would normally choose. I did do a little bit of clone stamping. There was some marks in the road, and there was a couple other cars that were down here, but I just like how it had somewhere to go other than here. You know, the obvious choice of the monoliths.
Yeah, it's interesting here. I'm seeing some interesting, as far as like clone stamping or healing tools or brushes. You went out of your way to kind of clean up the road, and then you cleaned up the cars out in the distance. Left those two in, which I think actually ultimately adds to this photo. It adds more or a different storytelling element to this picture. Yeah, I like this edit a lot.
Thank you. All right, let's see what you did with your own.
So, so this is where I have to make somewhat of an admittance. When we filmed this bit, I hadn't actually edited my own photos. So this is going to be sort of retrospective. These are the comparisons between my photos and Matt's photos after the fact. Final edits, baked in. This is what we had. That's the end for this video. So if you guys like this or you want me to do something more or something a little bit different, go ahead and leave that in the comments, and I will see you next time.